Coming up on this edition of the Black Vault Radio, I sit down with a man who not only claims to have found pieces of metal from the Roswell wreckage, but he says that the federal government came after him to examine the evidence. Professor and geologist, Mr. Frank Kimbler.
As soon as I said I wanted the silicon isotopes, he immediately jumped to outer space. The isotopes, and the isotopes were off, meaning that they were not exactly terrestrial. You know, the Roswell Daily Record, those people are scared of the government, and the editors check it. That's exactly what I said. This is the foundation of science. You need to have curiosity. You need to kind of go into that unknown side of it. It's exploration, discovery, research.
All that and much more. So stay tuned. The Black Vault Radio is about to begin. More than 20 years ago, I began a journey. My quest for the truth. My name is John Greenewald, and I have hammered the United States government with Freedom of Information Act requests trying to get answers. I have more than 2 million pages of declassified documents for you to download at theblackvault.com. Now, I attempt to dive even deeper and talk to some of the most brilliant minds on this planet. No government secret is off limits, and no question is off the table. All I aim for is the truth. This is the Black Vault Radio. That's right, everybody. This is another episode of the Black Vault Radio. I am your host, John Greenewald Jr. Just seems like a couple days ago when I posted episode number 1, but in fact it actually was just a couple of days ago where I posted episode number 1. Welcome to episode number 2, and if you missed the first one, definitely try and tune in after you listen to my interview coming up with Frank Kimbler, because episode number 1 dealt with Stanton Friedman, his history, his research, and I have known that man for more than 21 years. He never ceases to amaze me simply because I learn stuff all the time. Every time I talk to him. And this interview was no different. He actually told me, and this was a story that actually resonated with at least one person on the YouTube channel that commented on it. I had not brought it up publicly yet. I wanted to talk about it in episode number 2, simply because Stanton talked about his early days of UFO research, and he brought up a very cool personal insight story about how he got started. And let me read the comment from the YouTube channel. This was by a user called Parapulse TV. And Parapulse TV says, so if the UFO book that first intrigued Stanton had cost $2 instead of $1, the world likely would have never learned of Roswell. Fun fact, unquote. That is actually very true. Stanton told a story where he, in his words, I'm not trying to insult him, in his words, he called himself a cheapskate. And he found a book that was literally about $1, and he decided to order it on the UFO phenomena. And as we know, the rest is history. That sparked an interest within him. We got into deeply what that book was about, then what really intrigued him about the UFO phenomena, and ultimately why he got into the field and why he does what he does. And it was a great story, great insight. And again, after 21 plus years of knowing that man, I had never heard that before. So no disappointment there. I was very, very honored that Stanton agreed to be my first guest bringing back the Black Vault Radio. This show, though, I don't think will let you down either. I'm going to talk to Mr. Frank Kimbler. Now, Frank is literally a guy that's going out into the field and searching for answers when it comes to Roswell. Now, I'm going to say this up front. This is not a Roswell radio program, even though we've talked about it here on the last 2 episodes now. However, Frank's story is current. And not only that, it is fascinating. I never ever thought that I would do one radio program on Roswell, but with Stanton, you just got to do it because he is the man when it comes to that topic. But why number 2 is also dealing with it, but on a much more scientific level, with physical trace evidence is just that. This man is going out, he's in the field, he's looking for answers, looking for evidence, looking for physical trace evidence, and he's found it. And not only has he found it, and not only is the scientific results coming back as pretty peculiar as you're about to hear, but the federal government was tipped off that he was out there doing this and that he found something, and they came after him looking for answers. So this is just breaking in the last couple of weeks, where Mr. Kimbler was contacted by the Bureau of Land Management, or the BLM, and they demanded that he come in with those samples. What happens? Stay tuned. I'm excited to find out exactly what happened when Frank joins me here on the Black Vault Radio. Now, before we get to the news, though, and then on to Frank, I want to talk about a couple things. When I posted episode number 1, there was no way to quote-unquote subscribe, simply because the show had not existed yet, so I couldn't really tell you, go here to iTunes, go there to subscribe to the podcast. Now that the show is up and running, I worked hard in the last 48 hours, even though yesterday was July 4th, which, by the way, happy July 4th. I hope you all enjoyed your holiday and you were safe and sound and tucked in your bed safely last night. Hopefully nobody was hungover here on July 5th. That being said, I worked very hard in the last 48 hours to get those feeds up. That way, instead of subscribing just to the YouTube channel, which I do highly recommend that you do, because every episode of the Black Vault Radio will be uploaded to the YouTube channel, you also can subscribe now on iTunes. iTunes has approved the program. It's into the database. So however you want to access iTunes, whether it be on your desktop computer or your cell phone or however you do it, go ahead and search for the Black Vault Radio. It will come up. You can subscribe. That way, when I post an episode, not only will it go to the YouTube channel, but it will also go to iTunes. That way you will be notified right away that a new episode is available. Now, in case you are wondering about the YouTube channel, you can go ahead and subscribe to that as well. If you go to theblackvault.com, you will find the YouTube icon at the very top, and just go ahead and click on that, subscribe to the channel, because again, those radio shows will be uploaded there and ready to download. The other one that just got approved just hours ago, if you use Stitcher. Stitcher is another iTunes-like podcast feed aggregator, I believe is the correct term. And so if you do use Stitcher for your radio programs and your podcasts, I am now approved on there as well. So just log on to Stitcher, search for Black Vault Radio. Voila, you can subscribe. A couple more coming online, but to be honest with you, it's kind of silly to have so many options. I mean, between iTunes and Stitcher, that's probably more than enough for you guys. So feel free to log on to any of those channels, subscribe. That way you are notified. One of the other big things that I want to talk about before we move on to the news headlines is the message forums on the Black Vault. Now, I'm the first to admit here in the last, I would say probably 5 years or so, 3 to 5 years, closer to 5. The online message forums have really died. And the reason is because you've got things like Facebook and Twitter, and people are going on there and corresponding. It's a lot easier, let's face it. Everybody likes that just simply because you kind of log into one place. You can see your friends, your family, who you're fans of, the companies that you follow, and this and that. There's a huge problem with it, though. First and foremost, your privacy. And let's face it, Facebook has made quite a few headlines here in the last couple months. And so I see a lot of people starting to migrate away from Facebook, not only deleting their accounts, but if they save it, they're very much more apprehensive to communicate and to get into those discussions, whether it be on politics, the paranormal, research, stuff like that. So not only do you have those privacy concerns, but you also don't have the infrastructure to really use it as a viable resource. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I've got a Black Vault forum on Facebook, one of the groups. And you can subscribe to that, which I welcome you to do, because a lot of people only want to use Facebook, and that's fine. But the Black Vault also has a community feature, which is the message forums. And if you go to www.theblackvault.com/community, the reason I'm bringing this up is because I'm starting to see kind of a reverse of that decline, that it's starting to rise back again. that people are realizing, hey, wait a minute, Facebook isn't as fun as I thought it was. It might be, a lot easier to just log on to that one place, but they're apprehensive of getting into these conversations. So there is kind of an increase. So what I'm doing is inviting all of you with this story to come to the Black Vault community as well, because there's a great group of people. It's on the rise. It was, 5+ years ago, incredibly popular, and then obviously Facebook just kind of took over. Well, I'd like to invite you back. The forum for the Black Vault Radio just went online today. So instead of commenting on Facebook, because, and this is my comment about it not being a viable resource, the thread will essentially die within a couple days or a week. So you miss what people are talking about. The amount of posts that I put on these pages will ultimately bury these episodes, and so you don't really get to see it. However, on the forums, it's totally different. We've got people talking in threads that were started literally years ago, and people still communicate and still add information, still correspond with each other. And so that's why, from a resource standpoint, it's a lot better when it comes to the format. So again, theblackvault.com/community. Explore all sorts of different topics, but the reason I wanted to bring it up is there is now a dedicated forum for these shows, and every episode will get its own thread, and then you can just log on, figure out, hey, I want to comment on Frank Kimbler's interview. I want to talk about Stanton Friedman's interview. Just find that thread, go on in there, post your comments, have a lot of fun. Be respectful. That's one of the only rules. Be respectful, use some common sense, and you'll do just fine. But it is a great group of people, which I invite you all to. So, that being said, let's get on with the show and get to some headlines with TBV News. In the TBV News segment this episode, I want to go over a few headlines that occurred this week that I think you might be interested in. I want to start on the entertainment front. I probably won't do a lot of eyes on entertainment stories in this segment. This one, though, I think goes out to all you X-Files fans. Sony dropped a new trailer this week for a movie called UFO. Now, the premise is pretty interesting, actually, especially for you UFO fans out there. Not only is the title kind of intriguing, but the premises as well, wherein the trailer, when you watch it, and again linked into the show notes, if you watch the trailer, it is all about those UFO sightings that occur over commercial airports. We know the biggest one in the last few years, most notably, was the O'Hare UFO sighting. Who knows if that played a real role in motivating this particular premise, but that's what this trailer starts out at an airport. UFO, unidentified object, was seen. People are, in a frenzy. They're seeing this craft in the sky. Well, then the trailer goes on to kind of depict a younger, maybe teenager, kind of trying to analyze what's going on and figures out how it all works. And of course, math plays a role in the formula, and he thinks they're coming back and the government is out to get him. It looks pretty cool. I'm never turned off by a UFO or alien movie, so I'm sure I'll watch this one. But why is it intriguing for you X-Files fans? Well, it stars Gillian Anderson. When she announced that she wouldn't be returning to the next season of the X-Files, I kind of assumed myself that maybe she was kind of tired of these types of roles when she got entwined as her persona Scully had in the X-Files, where she investigated paranormal sightings. Well, who knows if she's investigating in this movie, but she's starring in it, and so she will make her appearance. So for all you Scully fans out there that have been depressed you won't get your Gillian Anderson fix, don't worry. Sony dropped that trailer for UFO, and it is something that you don't want to miss. I would say about it probably reminds me a little bit of the War Games movie. Do you remember that, War Games? War Games meets the X-Files. That's probably what this movie is all about. But hey, I'll still watch it. Don't miss the trailer. One of the other big news this week that's getting some headlines and some play deals with a little bit of history, and as in the American history with nuclear weapons and the hundreds and hundreds of tests of nuclear bombs that the United States set off. I don't even know if there is a real accurate number on how many nuclear tests that we undertook through about the 1945 to 1963 era. And 1963 was the first nuclear test ban treaty that was signed. So that kind of put a damper on those nuclear tests where we were blowing the heck out of, well, just about anything we could blow up. We were out there in the desert. We went underground. We went in the ocean. We even went into the atmosphere detonating these things. I'm sure we probably did some lasting damage and might not ever figure out how much damage we actually did. But that being said, they filmed all of it. Now, a lot of these films have remained classified literally for decades and decades. Now, thanks to some scientists at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, they have really scoured the archives to rescue, scan, and analyze those nuclear weapon films that the government and military has kind of sat on for decades. Now, the cool thing about what they're doing is they're preserving this history, and let's face it, it should be preserved. There is a lot that we learned from those tests, but I bet that there's still a lot that we can learn as we go back and analyze the footage, and you know, our technology is a lot better. We have a better understanding and grasp for what this science is all about. So these films, instead of going out and blowing up all of these places again, maybe we can learn something from these film reels. And a lot of this history, and it's not just with nuclear weapons, but a lot of this history is getting destroyed. It's getting lost, whether it be destroyed because it deteriorates over time, or the government just says, hey, let's destroy this because it's time and they just don't want to house it anymore. Sometimes they can legally do that. They're called records retention schedules. They don't have to keep everything forever. So sadly, some of this stuff is lost just because they want to destroy it. But these scientists know the value behind these film reels. They are rescuing literally thousands and thousands of film reels. But the best part of what they're doing, they're digitizing it and just dumping it all online. This week, they added at least another 500 declassified nuclear weapon test videos. And I'm telling you, if you don't want to sleep for a while, look at the magnitude. Actually, Stanton Friedman and I talked about it in episode 1 of the Black Vault Radio. But the true magnitude of what these nuclear weapons can do. And they only got stronger and they only got more powerful after every test. And so they are terrifying. But it is fascinating to see. So definitely log on to the show notes, or if you want to Google it, the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, or LLNL, YouTube channel is the home for all of these film reels. And they really have done a great job rescuing these things and preserving it. And I really do want to, and this is an honest statement, if somebody wants to help me out with this that's listening, I really want to create maybe a petition or some kind of push to put an end to the destruction of government and military documents. I can do a show all about that specific topic, but just very quickly, this is a prime example that information, whether it be film reels, documents, photographs, all of the above, I can cite multiple and numerous examples where the government and military has destroyed records. And honestly, in this day and age, the 21st century, where you can buy thumb drives that are 3,000 times the size of computers just a decade ago, I just don't think anything should be destroyed anymore. I believe that it should be digitally preserved. There are ways to store it online. I'd love to create a push where the government just can't destroy anything anymore, that they can't delete anything anymore. Because I really believe this history is so valuable to my son growing up, my soon-to-be daughter here growing up. I think that that should be preserved. So I think we do have to create a push to put an end to all that. But until that happens, and kudos to all those scientists over there at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory for digitizing, saving, and rescuing all of those film reels. It really is something that needed to be done, so I'm glad that they are doing it. The last story I want to deal with before we get started with Frank Kimbler is on the UFO front in Great Britain. Now, as some of you may know, over the last, I would say, 5+ years, the British government has declassified literally thousands of UFO documents that they have had classified within their archives in an interest of transparency. They want to show the world what they have and also what they don't have. There's no smoking gun or proof of aliens in any of these records, but there is a fascinating history behind what they did and how they looked at it. My friend Nick Pope will be coming up on the Black Vault Radio in the next month or so. He is going to be joining me on the air here and talking a little bit about what that history is. For those who don't know Nick is actually the guy who ran the UFO desk within the British government. So I'm excited to have him aboard on a future episode and for him to really talk about and dissect what the British government did. But this week, apparently more documents are being released, which includes a dossier which talked about not only did they have a UFO desk that was more of the public image, this was the desk that fielded those reports, but also behind the scenes they had British spies trying to analyze this UFO technology, whatever it was. Why were they looking into it? Well, they wanted to use it. They wanted to utilize it. They wanted to figure it all out and use it as a tool or a weapon against their own enemies during the Cold War. Now, just to give you a couple quotes and some articles that went around in the mainstream media this week. Again, Nick Pope, here is a couple quotes from him. I ran the British government's UFO project, and I'm pleased that a number of ufologists have acquired documents about my old job, using the UK's Freedom of Information Act. Actually, this is part of what's been a wider 10-year program to declassify and release these files. And I've been working with my former employers to try to ensure that the final files are made available to the public as soon as possible. All this is part of our wider commitment to open government and Freedom of Information Act. Freedom of Information. Nick Pope also states, I can confirm that we were aware of Russian and Chinese research into UFOs and into parapsychology more generally. We didn't take a definitive view on the true nature of the UFO phenomena. We remained open-minded but non-committal about the possibility of extraterrestrial visitation. And so we looked at the issue in terms of threats and opportunities. Even if UFOs were just exotic atmospheric plasma phenomena, as one of my colleagues in intelligence believed, we thought we might be able to derive some novel military technologies from this, and weaponization formed part of our speculation, particularly the idea of some sort of directed energy weapon. So Nick Pope sent that email to a couple journalists, and that was published throughout some mainstream articles. I will link that in the show notes. Just based on those two quotes that I read from Nick, that's why I'm excited to have him aboard. Nick and I have known each other for quite some time. We appear on quite a few of the same television programs. Most notably, he and I appeared extensively on the show Unsealed. If you didn't see that while it was on the air, I believe it is still on Netflix. Could be wrong on that, but it's been airing quite a bit. I get letters all the time from people who binge watch that series. It was a lot of fun to do. There's about 5 seasons to watch, and a lot of the episodes just had Nick and I in it, and we just kind of bounced back and forth. Had a lot of fun doing it. Sadly, they don't do any more of those, but there is a lot of information to find there. So I can't wait to grab a hold of Nick's mind and pick his brain a little bit on exactly what the UK government was doing. So back to that headline, make sure that you look out for any more, and I'll bring it to you here on the Black Vault Radio, but look out for those headlines when they finally release some of these documents, because what I've learned over the last quite a few years, it seemingly gets teased quite a bit, but the documents are very kind of slow coming. So they'll tease the documents, and then a month or 2 or 3 or 6 months later, then they actually drop the documents. I'm not really sure why that is. I don't know if it's just because they get the media attention to begin with, and then when the documents come out, it's kind of a recycled story, so most people don't pick it up. Maybe there's a tactic in that. I don't really know. Be that as it may, though, when they are released, I'll make sure that I bring it to you, and any great revelations right here on TBV News. Let's not waste any more time, though. I am thrilled to have Frank Kimbler talk about his recent experience with the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, that got tipped off about his Roswell research, going out into the field and finding some unexplained samples. Well, for whatever reason, they wanted them, and they wanted Frank in their office. That just happened a couple weeks ago. He's here to talk about his experience and what happened. Stay tuned for the TBV Dialogue segment. In this episode's TBV Dialogue segment, Professor Frank Kimbler steps into the vault. Frank Kimbler is a geologist and professor of earth science in Roswell, New Mexico. He has spent some of his free time hunting physical trace evidence related to the 1947 Roswell event. He has worked as a professional geologist for more than 30 years and has taught school for about half of that time. He's worked as an oceanographer for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, and as a mining engineer for the state of Arizona. His research has resulted in the discovery of a number of physical artifacts from the Roswell UFO debris field, including metallic fragments, plastic, 1940s military metal buttons, and a .50 caliber bullet he believes from the World War II era, amongst many other things. Most recently, he had a very interesting encounter with the feds relating to his research. Let me welcome to the show, Mr. Frank Kimbler.
It's nice to be on the Black Vault. I appreciate it. I appreciate it very much. It gives me a chance to talk to lots of people, as if I don't talk to a number of people anyway.
Well, I appreciate your time, and your story intrigued me, I must say, because I've been around this field a long time, and I've heard a lot of stories in my day, and it's very kind of hard, I hate to say it this way, to impress me in regards to present-day government intervention in UFO issues. And I read your kind of recent experiences, which we're going to get into today. But I had to reach out to you because this is a fascinating story where the feds kind of got involved in your research and wanted to check out some of these artifacts that you're finding. So before we get into that, I want to start with just kind of what your background is. I mean, I've talked a little bit about it, being a geologist and a professor, but what got you into this field of study of research?
You know, science fiction, I'm a science fiction buff. I like watching the science fiction things, especially the really old ones, like, you know, Earth versus the Flying Saucers and things like that. I love those types of old science fiction things. But above all, I think that I was always fascinated with or intrigued with the concept of being visited by extraterrestrials. I always thought that was kind of a fascinating thing, and I'd been interested in it for a long time. I even saw a UFO when I was traveling. When I got out of college, a friend of mine, we got in a van and we sort of traveled across the United States, and we were at Ute Lake State Park in New Mexico, and we were sitting there by the campfire, and the night sky was beautiful. It was crystal clear, and Bob, guy's name was Bob, he said, a friend of mine, he says, Frank, he says, look at that thing in the sky. And I looked up and I says, nah, that's a satellite. It's one of those little streaks going across the sky that you see, you know, in the middle of the late night. And he says, no, watch what it does. It's not a satellite. And I looked at it for a moment, and it made right-angle turns, and it zigzagged across the sky and then disappeared. And I'm going, oh, my gosh, that's got to be my first UFO that I ever saw, because I don't know of any aircraft that we have that can make right-angle turns at high speed and then zip across the sky like that. So I was, I think I was pretty much hooked after that, going, okay, so there's some things out there that are a little unusual.
And after that experience, then, did you just jump right into researching, or did you just say that was a pretty interesting encounter and let it go?
No, that was a you know, I didn't really jump into the research thing. I didn't start doing research on the UFO stuff, especially Roswell, until I was given a job opportunity here in Roswell, New Mexico, which is where I'm from now. And I've been here for about 9 years. So when I moved to Roswell, I went down to the International UFO Museum, and this was 9 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I'm going through the museum, and I'm going, oh my gosh, this is interesting, but there's no physical proof.
Yeah.
So I decided that since I was living here, that I was going to basically sit down and read every documentary, every book, every watch all the videos, do everything I can to learn about the story. I knew about Roswell. Everybody knows Roswell. You know, you see it in the movies. You see it plastered everywhere because it's the premier UFO crash site landing thing probably in all the world. Mm-hmm. So I just said, you know, there's got to be some physical evidence because there's lots of firsthand eyewitness accounts and everything, but no touchy-feely. And like they said, was it Missouri should the show me state?
Mm-hmm.
Need to have it. Need to have this in your hand. And I said, well, you know what? Since I live here, I'm gonna dedicate some time to this and see if I can find some physical evidence at the crash site. And the difficult thing about this is that nobody would tell me. The UFO Museum keeps it a secret as to where the actual site is.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know anybody around. I didn't know people like Don Schmidt or Stanton Friedman. I didn't know Tom Carey. I didn't know any of the authors at the time at all. Now I'm friends with all of them. They all know who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to do a lot of research. So I did some back engineering here is what I did. I knew that there was a couple of reports out there, and there was a 2002, I think it was, documentary on the Sci-Fi Channel that was the Roswell dig, and they went out there with the University of New Mexico, and they basically did an archaeological dig. And there was a really nice report written about that. It's out of print right now, but it is available if you call up the University of New Mexico. It's the Office of Contract Archaeology. You can actually grab the document and read it about the work they did. So it's called Geophysical Prospection at the Alleged UFO Crash Site on the Foster Ranch is the name of it. It's a nice scientific article.
And that was the
Read
one
that article.
And that was the one that Sci-Fi Channel was involved in, you said?
Yeah, that was the one
Okay.
that the Sci-Fi Channel was involved in, absolutely. And so I got a copy of that document, and I started looking through it. And to protect the archaeological site, to protect the crash site, there's no mention of anything in there in reference to where the crash site is. There's no township range section number, no latitude, longitude, nothing. However, there's a number of aerial photographs in there.
Okay.
So I started looking at that, and I'm going, you know what, I can figure this out. So it took me a whopping maybe hour, 2 hours, or whatever of perusing through some satellite images on Google Earth to figure out where it is. And then after that, I started doing my own satellite imagery analysis. I pulled out the old, I went out to Earth Observer, which is USGS, and they list all of the old aerial photographs and the satellite images for basically all of the United States. So I pulled all of the old aerial photographs from, I got a hold of the 1946, which I had this special order, which was before, and then the only other ones they had were 1954 and like 1960s and 1970s. So I got the 46, which is a really nice high-resolution black and white aerial photograph, and then I pulled the 1954 images, and there's several shot at different angles,
Okay.
and slightly different resolutions. I started comparing those side by side and came up with some pretty startling little bits of information there, going that, well, there is some changes that have taken place that you can clearly see in the aerial photographs. We're talking about things that like squares and rectangles, and normally what you get in nature is that you get odd shapes. You get things that are not perfectly geometrical. Not saying that it can't happen, but it's very odd to get perfect squares and perfect rectangles when you're looking at aerial photographs. Those things are usually indications of things that are man-made, like roads or basically dozer track lines where bulldozers come in, where people have scraped the surface, things like that. You can actually see that. And those kinds of things showed up in the aerial photographs, and I'm going, oh my gosh, you can actually you can see the edges of where it was cleared off. You can see some vertical, some not vertical, but you can see some horizontal lines in the pictures. They look like somebody went out there and systematically scraped the area. And I'm going, well, this is incredible. And it just so happens that all of this is very near or almost dead on from the area that the University of New Mexico did their archaeological work. So it says, well, this is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I have a Fisher Gold Bug metal detector, and that metal detector is so sensitive that it can actually find a BB-sized gold nugget down to 3 or 4 inches deep under the ground if you know how to use it. And of course, I found a number of really small gold nuggets, and I'm going, well, this is going to be perfect, provided that pieces of this craft that crashed out there north of Roswell, what we call the debris field or the crash site, provided that it had provided it was constructed of materials that could be detected.
Okay.
And that was an assumption on my part, looking at alloys and pieces of stuff. You can't really believe that there's unknown things out there. There might be unknown combinations of things.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, the way that we mix alloys and metals together. But pretty much, if we're making our spacecrafts out of aluminum and titanium and magnesium, and chances are the extraterrestrials probably are using similar things. If not, they're using some kind of organic stuff, which means I can't detect it at all. So I took my chances. So I used the aerial photographs to look at runoff, places where where material would run off from the land. And the other thing I thought about was this material that's out there, according to the stories, was very lightweight, and it wouldn't float in your hand or anything like that, but
Mm-hmm.
it was an alloy that was so lightweight that it could actually blow in the wind practically, kind of like aluminum foil. So I'm going, all right, most of the stuff should be near the surface, so it's not going to be like gold nuggets. It's only going to be
Mm-hmm.
fairly shallow. So I used runoff patterns and such to look to see how the water was running off from the land, and that's when I started searching with the metal detector. Now, when I was out there, first day that I went out, I was out there for a good solid probably 8 hours and didn't find anything. I didn't find a darn thing in the heat of the day, and was getting kind of frustrated. There was not even trash or anything that you would expect from some camper or hunter being out there. I didn't find anything at all. Then I went out the next day. I was not about to give up, and another 6 or 7 hours went by, and this is a true story. Right at just about the time the sun was going down, I got this little ding in my headphones with the metal detector, and it was in an anthill of all things, which is because they bring things up from the below the ground,
Mm-hmm.
and I found there was this little tiny piece of metal that looked a lot like aluminum, and picked it up. I'm holding this thing in my hand. The wind came and blew it out of my hand, and then I about had a heart attack because I couldn't find it took me a little while to figure out where it had blown off to, and I had to re-metal detect it again for the area. But I got it, and that was the start of this whole thing. Because I expanded my search area. I searched that area a lot, and I've ended up, over the course of probably a good 8 years, I bet I found probably 30 metallic fragments out there. And the interesting thing about it is that not all of it is the same, because you can certainly tell the difference. Some of it could very well be a camper trash, but other material is different. It's older, and it's basically been through hell and back. It's all ripped and torn up. Some of the edges are even melted. You can see where it's been subjected to some really high temperatures. And so this material, some of it's been tested.
Okay. Let me, before we get into the testing, I want to ask you one point of clarification with the photographs, because that to me is really intriguing, especially with your background and your expertise. I mean, this is what you do, and this is what you know when it comes to geology. Now, you talked about seeing from the photographs, comparing the 1946 photo and others post the Roswell event. You saw
1954.
1954. So you saw evidence of tracks, and it seemed like things were shaved off, and evidence of activity of maybe like a cleanup job. I don't want to speak for you, but is that kind of what you mean, right? With the
Oh no, that is exactly what I mean.
Okay.
Because you know what? Even though this was basically ranch land and such, there are the kinds of things that you see. Looks like there was a cleanup out there, and actually I've gone out to I've looked at other locations where secret things were happened, where things blew up. I looked at the area where they dropped a hydrogen bomb, the Broken Arrow, out of Albuquerque.
Okay.
And that one was in the 1950s as well. Now, luckily that didn't go off, or Albuquerque wouldn't be there.
Yeah.
So it just basically, when it exploded, it was the explosive charges on the inside that basically, not quite like a self-destruct, but it basically scattered stuff over a mile. They cleaned that up. The government cleaned that up really, really well, but you can still see in the old photographs the area where it happened. And not only that, still pieces of material from the casing still left out in that area. And then I've looked at the SR-71A crash sites, a number of those. Some of those are older, some of those are from like the late 50s, early 60s, and those crash sites are difficult to see, but you can still see where the crash site was. And I'm going, well, this looks very similar to the types of activity, places where you see, like I said, the places where maybe a bulldozer came in, or places that have been scraped off systematically, and it's not something that a rancher would do, not for such a large area. I mean, we're talking about something that covers maybe half a square mile, and that's a lot to be scraped up and moved around.
Yeah.
And it's easy to see in the aerial photographs, and that's kind of an expertise of mine, is to look at old aerial photographs and pick out things that are not supposed to be there. And it's kind of a fun hobby.
It sounds like a lot of fun. Now, the second part of that question with the photographs, since and you've kind of started to go towards this, is by comparing it to quote unquote crash sites. You saw evidence of the activity. Did you see evidence of, from a geological standpoint, did you see evidence that something impacted that area?
Now, that is something that you can't readily see unless you have something that is that's really close to the time. Between 1947 and 1954, that's 7 years of time. That's a lot of weathering. That's a lot of that's a lot of time for rain and runoff to sort of cover things up. And if people were to go out and look at, let's say, the SR-71, the Blackbird crash sites, if you look at those crash sites, even after just a few years have passed, they are almost, you've got to be really sharp. If you're talking about 3 or 4 years that has gone by, it's difficult to see the impact site itself. But what you can see is the cleanup area. It's really kind of hard to hide that. Because that disturbs, the crash site itself is kind of small, but the cleanup area is very large, and that makes it a little easier to see. Okay.
Now, do you do a lot of metal detecting? Let's not talk about the Roswell site. Do you do a lot of metal detecting outside of the Roswell site just for fun and as a hobby, or did you just start it for this site?
I like to go out and use the metal detector. It's kind of fun to look for things on the side of the road, or to go to parks, or look for little, dimes and nickels and rings and things like that. It's kind of fun.
It seems
like
you
go out to a lake. If you happen to go out to a lake, an area that has some kind of a little beach where people hang out, they're always losing things out of their pockets, stuff like that. So it makes it kind of fun to go out. But I think I have more fun going out and looking, try to find, I've been out to some aircraft crash sites, and I've looked at some things like the aircraft sites and things like that to find artifacts. It's fun. It's just a fun hobby.
It sounds like a fun hobby. And the reason why I asked that is then to kind of juxtapose the beach metal detecting and going to crash sites and so on. Let me go back to now the Roswell site that you're finding pieces of metal. With your experience, does that site, the Roswell site, stick out as finding things that you don't normally find? Meaning, do you find little metal fragments out in the middle of nowhere or on the beach, or is this really kind of sticking out in your mind as something really fascinating?
That's a good question, because you always have to contend with the idea of campers and hunters and things like that are out in the area. And for one thing, I have found pieces of aluminum cans, and I have found flip tops and things. but these things don't look like what's being found out at the crash site, the Roswell site.
Okay.
Because when you get out to the Roswell crash site, the material that's out there is shredded. It looks like it almost looks like confetti. It's twisted and mangled up and folded over, and it's been rolling around out there in the desert for a long time. And I have seen lots of artifacts from my years of metal detecting, and I never found anything that even remotely resembled anything that was out at the Roswell crash site, which
interesting.
Kind of struck me as being kind of unusual. Not saying that it couldn't be trash.
But is this an area, not to interrupt you, but is this an area where campers go and pitch a tent? I mean, you don't have to tell me where it is, just give us an idea of how remote is this? Is this a place that people traverse all the time, or are you like way off the beaten path where humans very rarely go?
The area is off the beaten path.
Okay.
And it is. There is there's some faint 2-track dirt roads that go into the area there, but there's no campgrounds there. There's no ranch houses or houses. There's nothing nearby at all. It's remote, and I have found up on the ridge. There's a kind of like a little bunch of hills that's just above where it is, and I've been up on those hills, and there's some evidence that maybe a camper or two have been out there, but there's the material is different because when you find things around where a campfire is, you might find an aluminum pie plate, which I've never found anything up there. Usually those areas where people have camped out is basically they're clean. They've done a pretty good job of cleaning up their messes out there. And a lot of times people will throw up maybe an old pie plate or a piece of aluminum or something in the fire and it gets melted. But I've never found any of that out there ever. Not saying that I haven't found some interesting things other than the artifacts. I found some. I think I found in the course of 8 years maybe 4 old tobacco tins scattered around, but those were not at the crash site itself. Those were a little farther away, and an occasional boot tack. Which is really kind of interesting to be able to find a boot tack laying on the ground. It just tells you that somebody had walked over the area. And then in addition to, besides finding the metal things, I found some other unusual things out there. The 1940s, late 1940s, early 50s aluminum fatigue buttons. I found 3 of those buttons out there, and they were positively identified as being basically military fatigue buttons, which means those people, either they were having some kind of an orgy out there and ripping each other's clothes off, which I don't think the military was doing.
Or not sure if there's documents on that.
Maybe they were crawling on their hands and knees and maybe popped a few buttons off. And these buttons were found pretty deep. They were found about 3 inches deep in hard packed clay up. And I'm going, oh my gosh, these things they're pretty old.
So so from a geological standpoint, being that deep, is that indicative of 6-7 decades going by whenever you found
there
them?
was some time that went by, considering this is a desert, doesn't rain a lot in the desert, and the fact that it was sitting in some really hard packed stuff was almost like, it was almost like caliche. It was down about 3 inches, and it was that stuff was it's old.
Okay.
So it had to come from it came from the era. I'm sure that it came from the probably late 40s is when it came from, and they are military fatigue buttons. And that sort of intrigued me even more. That was a drive to, when I found those, I'm going, oh, there is no way the military can say they weren't out there, because they were, and I've got the proof of it. So the buttons alone prove that they were out there. Now, what they were looking for, I have no idea. Maybe they were looking for a weather balloon, but I can't understand why there would be buttons laying around if it was just a weather balloon. Somebody was down on their hands and knees looking for something out there.
So let's go to because you put up a convincing argument. You've got the expertise, and why I was kind of pushing with some of the other sites as well is to just kind of give the audience a background to your expertise. And you put up a convincing argument that what you're finding out at Roswell at this crash site is definitely different than your beach experiences and going out to another military aircraft crash site. So let's get to the metal fragments themselves that you've talked briefly about. Give us a little bit more about what exactly you're finding when it comes to these metal fragments, and why are they sticking out to you as not being a tin can or something that you can readily identify?
Well, these the metal fragments, every single one of them are small. Most of them are half the size of your little fingernail to maybe the size of your thumbnail, and that's about as big as they get.
Okay.
They are aluminum alloys of some kind. They look like aluminum. Some of them are old. Some of them are a little bit newer, and I don't know why they look like that. Like I said, there's probably 3, maybe 4 different kinds of materials out there. And the older stuff it's been out there for a long time, and it has it's kind of a grayish, dull stuff that looks like old weathered aluminum is exactly what it looks like. And the nature of it is it's folded over, sometimes multiple times. And it's not aluminum foil. It's thicker than aluminum foil, and it has been folded. Some of this stuff has been folded 3 or 4 or 5 times. And it's almost like some kind of samurai sword stuff. I think what they do is they keep folding stuff over and then pounding it flat. And that's exactly what this stuff looks like. It's folded over. Some of it is twisted, sort of suggesting that maybe it went through some kind of horrendous explosion or something like that. It's twisted and gnarled up, and it looks, and since I've been out to other like crash sites, aircraft crash sites, it looks a lot like that material, because that material is also twisted and mangled up and folded over multiple times because of the force of impact. And this is the kind of thing that intrigued me when I pulled this stuff out, and it also was the reason why I've had some of it, not all of it, because I've got like 30 pieces of this material, but some of it's been analyzed, and it's unique in its the things that are found in it, which is interesting. If you want to hear the science behind
and let me ask you a quick question, and it's okay if you can't answer. I apologize if you don't want to name who analyzed it, but can you kind of introduce who looked at it and who talked about it, or who looked at it and analyzed it? I mean,
it was the first people that looked at this was New Mexico Tech over in Socorro. It was done there. Some of it was also looked at the University of New Mexico.
Okay. And are these blind tests? Meaning, do they know that it's from the Roswell crash site?
They didn't know what it was.
Okay.
They just I said, hey, I want this analyzed.
Okay.
And they looked at it for me. So it was it's interesting to do that. Usually, I got a story about this, and there's one of them that so I took the very first sample that was called AH1. That was one I found in an anthill, and I took that sample. It was paid for by the International UFO Museum. They actually paid for the analytical work, and I took it over to New Mexico Tech. I didn't mail it to them. I actually hand delivered it over there, and they analyzed it with their microprobe that they have over there, which is a very sophisticated piece of equipment. Mm-hmm. I'd like to have one in my garage. I could have a lot of fun looking at stuff.
I would imagine.
So they analyzed it, and it came out as being a 6000 series alloy. And let me explain this. every alloy that we have out there that's an aluminum alloy, there's like this thick book that's you can pull it down, and you can actually go out online and look at the different mixtures of elements that make up these alloys. So 3000 series alloys is what we make aluminum cans out of. 3000 and 5000 series alloys. So 5000 series is the top of an aluminum can, and a 3000 series is the side of an aluminum can. So it's made of two different alloys.
Okay.
Aluminum foil is like a 1X alloy. So there's all these different alloy designations. Well, when I got the data back from the microprobe, this came out to be a 6000 series alloy. And I'm going, well, that's interesting. I had to go and look that up because I didn't know what it was. I've become an expert on alloys, by the way, after doing this for so long. So all these aluminum alloys, they all have different uses. And it just so happens that a 6000 series alloy is used for, it's aerospace, and it's also used for construction purposes, for building large things out of, build a bridge out of aluminum or whatever.
Okay.
And I'm going, well, if this is a 6000 series alloy, it sure as heck shouldn't be out in the middle of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
So that struck me as being kind of unusual. So I wanted to get some more testing done on it. So I spoke to the lady, the microprobe manager at New Mexico Tech, and she said, "Well, I know somebody up at University of New Mexico, and it was Mike Spildy is his name. He does he's at the Institute of Meteoritics. He does a lot of work for looking at meteorites and stuff. He does a lot of things for NASA. So I took it up there to University of New Mexico, the sample, and took the sample with me. And I wanted to get some isotope work done on it. So he took me upstairs to another instrument, which is an ion. It can do. It's specifically designed to look at isotopes. And let me explain this a little bit. We're getting into the heavy science on this.
Mm-hmm.
Isotopes are like fingerprints. So you can look at an isotope of magnesium or look at an isotope of silicon, and you can determine where this element came from. Does it come from the ocean? Does it come from land? Does it come from, out of a volcano somewhere? Does it come from the moon? Does it come from Mars? Does it come from a meteorite? So you can look at these isotopes, and they're unique in that they are very much like a fingerprint, just like our fingerprints.
Okay.
So I wanted to have some silicon isotope studies done on this aluminum because it had a lot of silicon in it, which would be very easy to test. So took it up to University of New Mexico, and Mike Spildy took me upstairs to their ion mass spectroscopy lab up there that could do this isotope work. And he introduced me to the scientist up there because he was the manager of that particular piece of equipment. And he says, "Well, what do you want done on this?" And I said, I want the silicon isotopes done on this." And there was a long pause, and I won't mention his name. There was a long pause, and he said, "The only reason why you want silicon isotopes done on this piece of aluminum is because you suspect that it's from outer space." And he says, "What's the story behind this?" That's exactly what he said. He says, "What is the story behind this?"
So why would he jump to that assumption out of curiosity?
Well, when you ask for specific things, like the silicon isotopes on things,
okay,
that means you're looking for something in particular. He was smart enough to figure that out.
Okay. I'm just curious, why it had to come from outer space with that connection.
Oh, he
to
knew.
silicon.
As soon as I said I wanted the silicon isotopes, he immediately jumped to outer space. That was like the first thing out of his mouth. But he paused a little bit as he was sort of glaring at me because I remember it specifically.
Okay.
He says, "Well, tell me the story behind this." And I was honest with the man. I said, "This is a piece of material from the Roswell crash site." And as soon as I said Roswell, he says, "That's a bunch of hooey," and he wouldn't even talk to me.
Wow. Yeah.
So as I kind of was really upset. As I walked out with Mike Spildy into the hallway, and he's the manager of the microprobe downstairs, and he said, "I can't get you isotopes," but he says, "I'm curious," and he says, I can get you some good data." And so we went down to his lab, and he did some testing for me. It was kind of interesting because I just came back from doing some metal detecting work at for the Broken Arrow site, and had a piece of the casing from the hydrogen bomb, a little piece of it. It's called Duralloy. And I says, "Can we make a trade?" I says, "How about doing some testing?" And he says, "Well, fine." He says, "I'll just cut the price in half." And he says, "I'll have the little piece of Duralloy so you can do some more tests." So he was happy. Mm-hmm. And you know what? This is the foundation of science. Foundation of science is you need to have curiosity. You need to kind of go into that unknown side of it. It's exploration, discovery, research. Unlike the scientist upstairs, Mike Spildy has that, and he still has that passion to want to find out what something is. So he did the research, and he came up with essentially the same answers that New Mexico Tech did. So basically this was a 6000 series alloy. And then I said, okay, fine, I appreciate that. And then it was sent off to, in the museum, the International UFO Museum here paid for this, but we actually got some isotope work done, some magnesium isotopes, not silicon. And it was sent off to Evans Analytical Group, EAG, and I selected them because they did some work early on for the Yuba Tuba sample from down in South America. And they did some outstanding analytical work on that, and I'm going, okay, I'm not going to tell them what this is. And Yuba Tuba was another UFO thing. Matter of fact, you've got some stuff out on the Black Vault in reference to Yuba Tuba, I think, so that I've read. So anyway, I didn't tell them it was from Roswell. What I did was I said, this is from a crash site, and I want to determine what the source of the magnesium is. Did the magnesium come from seawater? Did the magnesium come from some mine down in South America or whatever? And I says, this is important so that I can determine whether this is a German manufacturer, whether it's U.S. manufacturer, whatever. So I was very, very kind of elusive but specific in not telling them that it was a UFO. So they send me the data back after I get it, and the samples. I got the samples back, which was nice. And I got to looking at the isotopes, and the isotopes were off. Off meaning that they were not exactly terrestrial. They actually showed as being extraterrestrial. Now, the problem with it was that their equipment was not very, was not very accurate. We couldn't get it close enough, and it was right at the edge of what's called their analytical error. So even though it was far off, it was still at the edge of the analytical error on the machine, which means that we need to have another test done at another lab that has better quality equipment. So,
but it was enough to lean you towards this is.
Oh, it was enough to more than lean me towards the fact that it might be of extraterrestrial origin.
Wow.
So needed to get some more testing done, and some arrangements were made with ASU, Arizona State University, because they had a secondary ion mass spectroscopy system, which is very accurate. And I had some conversations with the manager trying to get this set up for testing. And so the material, that AH-1, was sent to them via FedEx. That might have been a mistake. I should have hand-delivered it. And this is what started really piquing my attention, because I sent it out next day, and I got a telephone call from the manager of the lab that said, Frank, we opened up the package, by the way, this package was triple packaged. It had a FedEx package, not an envelope, FedEx package. Inside that was another package that was sealed. Inside that was another package that was sealed, and then that package had a plastic box that was also sealed that had the metallic fragment in it.
Oh boy!
According to the manager of the secondary ion mass spectroscopy lab. Say that 5 times in a row.
Uh-huh.
The lady was in tears. She was literally crying. She says, Frank, I opened this box up and there's nothing in it. And I says, what do you mean? She says, there's nothing inside the box. Did you put it in there? And I says, oh, yes, I did. And I says, it was small. And I says, if there was, it is electrostatically, it can cling to things. I said, did you make sure that, that it didn't know? She says, no, we did it in our clean lab, and it was gone. And
Wow.
she said, and I started asking her questions. I says, well, did you have it in your possession the whole time? She says, well, it sat in our mailroom for like an hour. And I said, really? And she says, the package was unopened and untampered. And I'm going, how the heck? Then I got to thinking, I'm going, somebody wanted to see this.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know who that somebody is. And somebody went to the trouble to covertly open up that package and take the material out of it. And so I went crazy. I did a very unprofessional thing. I put it out on the internet. Matter of fact, it's out there. Kimbler's FedEx package disappears from en route to ASU. And then talk about paranoid. I got really paranoid because my family saw that I had put that, and I didn't photograph it. See, I'm learning as I'm going here now, thinking that, I really didn't think there was any kind of a conspiracy or covert stuff or people, government hiding things. I didn't quite really believe that, especially when it came to Roswell stuff. But then I got to thinking, I'm going, how?
Yeah.
I'm going, how did this happen? I mean, it got there, but it was...
Do you think it was in transit that somebody intercepted it, got what they needed, resealed it?
Somebody opened it up, and they did such a clean job that you couldn't tell that it was ever tampered with. And then I've had several people come forward and tell me that there is a way to use ultrasonics to open the envelopes and to open the packages, and you can't even tell that they have been tampered with. You can open them up, take everything out, seal them back up again, and nobody knows what happened. And it's done with ultrasonics, which I did a little research on that, and it is possible to do that. So.
Wow. Well, and just for those listening, I'm going to be linking all of these links that we're talking about with Frank Kimbler today on the show notes. So if you don't know how to get there, go to www.theblackvault.com/show notes, and that will link to most everything that we are talking about. So, Frank, obviously now the sample just completely gone, never found, I assume?
Never found. Now, lucky for me, that was about 30, maybe 40% of the sample, and I still have part of that sample left, but it's so tiny now that there's not... The only thing that can analyze it now is one of those, it's called a TEMS or a SIMS microprobe. We'll have to look at it, or something called laser ablation. That's the only way to research. That thing is under... I don't have it here. The stuff is secured away and locked away now because of
never to be shipped via FedEx, I assume.
No, it's not. It's not going to go. It's not going to go FedEx anymore. And I had people say, "Well, why did you put your name on the package since you already, And it was, you just don't think about things like that. So now the paranoia has started in, and I'm going, okay. And then shortly after that, other strange things started happening. I was sitting here. We have a media room in our house, and I was sitting here watching a movie with the family in the media room, and the dogs were going crazy. And all of a sudden, I see this laser dot dancing on the side of the wall, and I'm going, "What the heck is that?"
That's enough to scare you.
And I didn't know what it was. I thought so. My first thing I did was I went outside and I'm checking around, and there's no way that it could have come in from the front of the house. And the way that the back of our house is oriented, there's a field that is probably 2 blocks long. There's a farm back behind me, and I thought it was kids, and it wasn't kids, and it had to come in. The way that my son and I figured this out is that this laser dot beam had to come in from the back patio area of the house, and that's against the farmland. It would had to have come through just several windows and then basically come into where the media room is. And So we figured that it came from the field back behind the house, and that was just too weird. And then the other thing that happened was I sent, and this was before I started cramming everything out there on the internet, I had a disc, and one of the samples that no one knew about this other than a telephone call, I sent it to a friend of mine. And within a week of getting that sample, somebody ransacked his house, whatever,
Wow.
ransacked his house, and the only thing they took was the disc with the data and the sample. That's all they took out of his house. They didn't take any money, they didn't take any jewelry, they didn't take anything, nothing of value, just that. Talk about paranoid. Now I'm really paranoid. Between the laser and then there's some guy pulled up in your typical black vehicle out in front of the house. The neighbors ran him off because he actually got out of the car and was asking questions about us. And the neighbor said, "Well, if you really want to know something, just don't call him up or something." It was really funny. The neighbors ran him off. He never came back. So the whole thing was really kind of a. So that was kind of a strange experience. Things have died out. That all happened probably, until recently. Things kind of died. That was probably about maybe 6 years ago that all of that was going on. About 6 years ago is when that was happening. So I haven't had any strange things other than maybe some computer viruses that would be there, show up on my computer.
I mean, that's, just one of those few things that you just mentioned is scary and strange enough. But fast forward now, just as we approach kind of the last 12, 13 minutes here of the hour, fast forward now to recently, this is where you and I officially met, where I heard about what was going on with you, where BLM got involved and contacted you. Give us that story. What happened there?
Well, this is the whole odd thing about this is that the BLM didn't pay any attention to anything. There's been, until recently. And this is something that I had to really kind of think about a little bit here because the Bureau of Land Management, they oversee, they administer our public lands for us, and they protect, archaeological resources, and they basically protect our land for us, for future generations. That's what they're supposed to do. And so I had been metal detecting out there, picking up stuff all along under the premise, and there's this beautiful little document that's out there that says collecting on public lands, that basically inside this beautiful little pamphlet published by the BLM, and it's out on the internet. It's called Collecting on Public Land by the BLM, and it's out there, and it basically says that you can, as long as things are less than 100 years old, you can pick them up and keep them, as long as it's not like, there's certain things like can't be from a burial site, can't be an Indian artifact, but if it's less than 100 years old, it's something that you can go out and metal detect. So the way this got started, and the BLM was ignoring this, at least I think they were ignoring it, because they never contacted me or never said anything in reference to it, even despite the fact that I've been on a number of documentaries in reference to the things that I've found out there, and not once have they ever come forward. Been on the Smithsonian Channel and the Discovery and National Geographic about the things that and I don't have any books. I don't write any books out there. I just do this because it's something that I'm curious about, wanting to find some physical proof. So there was a new ranch owner that controls the land around where the crash site is, and the ladies that are actually part of the family that owns the ranch, out of respect for them, because we had a little feud, and that's what started this whole thing, I think, because they brought too much attention to me. They said, we run because the UFO festival is starting, like this week. It starts this weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday is the Roswell UFO Festival. And so what they wanted to do is they wanted to run tours out to the crash site. So they had this VIP tour where they were going to have metal detectors, and they said, we're going to let you run metal detectors out, and this is public land, and we're going to charge you like $150 to go out and run metal detectors and stuff. Well, they tried to get a permit from the BLM, and the BLM says, what is it that you want to do? And they said, well, we run metal detectors out there and pick up the little bits of stuff like Frank Kimbler has been doing for 8 years.
Yeah, just throw Frank
And
under the bus.
The BLM basically went crazy, and the BLM said, no, you're not going to do this, and then they immediately got on the phone to me and said, what have you been doing? We want you to come in, and we want to see the artifacts. And I'm going, oh, my gosh. So now the BLM has taken a keen interest, and
Yeah.
I think, I don't know whether it was just timing or what, but they said, we want to see this material. And then the young archaeologist, she calls me up on the phone. I won't mention her name because I don't like the lady myself. I will not say what I was calling her, but we just won't go into that because she's not very. She's not a people person. Let's put it that way. So she gets on the phone with me and she says, Frank, she says, I want you to bring the artist. Now, they didn't do a search warrant type of thing. She says, we want you to bring the artifacts in. And then she says, oh, by the way, an enforcement officer will be here as well. And I was just very nice, and I said, okay. And as soon as I got off the phone, I went crazy on the Internet. I said, they want me to bring my samples in. They're going to try to confiscate them, which they would have if I would have brought them in, and they would have arrested me, and I know that for a fact.
Under what grounds? Because you mentioned this pamphlet, and again, for those listening, I've got it linked in the show notes, theblackvault.com/show notes. The pamphlet clearly states you have a legal right to do this. So why?
There is another rule.
Uh-oh, okay.
Now, this one is, I love this. That particular pamphlet is based upon the antiquities laws of the United States, and I pulled the CR up on it, the Code of Federal Regulations. I looked that one up. But there's another one, which is prior to that, from like 1969. It's the Historical Antiquities Act, and basically that one is written that says anything less than things have to be. It's 50 years, not 100 years.
Okay.
So the young archaeologist says, no, using the 50-year rule, you are in violation of the Antiquities Act of the United States. And I'm going, you got to be kidding me, right? She says, no, and that's why I want to see these artifacts, because you just violated the laws of the United States. And I says, not according to this pamphlet, the other pamphlet, which I sent to them. I sent that to the BLM. And so I went out on the Internet, basically went crazy going, hey, the BLM is trying to confiscate this stuff, and I need help. And that's exactly what I put all over Facebook and everything, and it scared me. Now, the telephone call that I got from the BLM, I think, was on a Thursday. They wanted to have their meeting on Monday. And during that time, I was expecting the feds to break down my door, search my house. My wife was all stressed out. I was all stressed out. My whole family was stressed out. Nobody bothered to call up and say anything to me from the BLM. They just let this thing roll. And I just went even more crazy. And then I contacted the media, newspapers, and this is what really scared me on this, John. I tell you the truth. So I contacted our local newspaper here, the Roswell Daily Record, and the Roswell Daily Record sent a reporter out to talk to me, and she interviewed me. It was a long interview, took pictures, told her what was going on, the same thing that happened. And I says, when are you going to run this article? And she says, oh, this article is going to run Saturday, either Saturday or Sunday. I think it was Saturday's paper. It's going to run in Saturday's paper, which was
the Saturday before the meeting.
Yeah, before the meeting. She says, we're going to run this on a Saturday because the meeting with the BLM was supposed to be on Monday, or was on Monday. And she says, well, we'll run this on Monday. And I says, well, that's cool. So 2 hours later, she gives me she sends me a text message and says, my editor says we're not going to run this. And I'm going, this is a good story. And I got to thinking, I'm going, well, who's pulling the chain on the newspaper?
Yeah.
Well, right after that, I sent a note to the International UFO Museum because they're friends of mine, and I have been working with them for a long time, and I had some of the stuff on display. I do now. It's back on display. at the International UFO Museum. And come to find out that their director said, no, we can't help Frank, and we're staying out of this. And I'm going, holy smokes. And the first thing that went through my mind was, okay, somebody's pulling the strings on the International UFO Museum because I can't get help from them. Somebody's pulling the strings from the newspaper, and all of this is going through my mind. And so, of course, I went back out on Facebook and the Internet, and I said, the Roswell Daily Record, those people are scared of the government, and the editor's checking. That's exactly what I said.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately, I got a note back from the writer, the reporter, and the young reporter basically said, Frank, she says, it might be really good for you. She says, it will make things easy for me if you retract what you put on there. And I said, okay. So no stories were run, except I went one step further, is I went to the TV folks. I went to KRQE. They found out about it. They did a really, really nice interview, and that interview was on Saturday. It hit, that interview was like prime time. It was like their very first thing on. So that interview showed up. It showed up, let me see, I think this was on a Friday. So it showed up Friday evening at 4:30. They aired it again that night, and they aired it again on Saturday morning.
Okay.
So it was, and so I got lots of coverage from that. And then the telephone started going off like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
People wanting to help, and I got like several attorneys behind me, and I got letters, even though the attorneys couldn't show up. They said, here, this is what you need to show them. So I go walk. Are you ready for this? This is no telephone calls from the BLM, nothing. So several people that I work with, including also the media folks, were sitting in the lobby when I showed up at the BLM. I walk in, go through a couple of locked doors. The young lady archaeologist, her name is Courtney, by the way. I don't mind mentioning her name because she's public information.
Mm-hmm.
So she ushered me back to their meeting room, and there's one of those conference call things in the middle of the desk that was there. And even though it wasn't green, the lights were on. And the first thing I said, "Is that on?" And they said, "No, it's not on." And I jokingly said, "Well, you'd have any cameras or hidden things around the room?" And they started laughing. And I said, "No." And I says, "Oh, by the way, where's your enforcement officer?"
Mm-hmm.
And the people that were there was the managers for the BLM and the archaeologist that was there. And I says, "Where's your enforcement officer?" And they says, "He's not coming in today." And I said, "Really?" And I says, and then this is what they said. They said, "It was not our intent to scare you."
Yeah.
And I said, well, I says, y'all did a good job because I haven't had any sleep in like 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, we did not intend for this. We just wanted to get clarification on our rules for collecting on public land.
Now, did you have the artifacts with you?
No. In fact, they said, you didn't bring the artifacts, did you? And I says, no, I didn't. So we spent more than 90 minutes, of which, I mean, I was in this meeting with them for 90 minutes, and I would have to say that probably only about maybe 40 minutes, about half of that, I guess, was talking about the rules and regulations, and I brought up that one pamphlet, Collecting on Public Lands, and they said, yeah, you sent it to us, and we saw it. And they admitted, they said, yes, this kind of makes the rules kind of obscure. We know about it. And I says, well, how about taking it offline so that other people won't have this same mistake? And they said, well, we'll work on that. And I said I have lots of data, lots of information in reference to the I says, nobody knows more about the physical archaeological part of this than I do. Mm-hmm. And I said, I'm willing to work with your archaeologist, and I will supply you with all of the information that I have. And there's been some mistakes made, and I'm willing to work with you folks. And that's what we talked about. And they didn't have the 1946 imagery, which I said that I would provide to them, which I haven't done yet. And they didn't ask me for anything. I said, I'm willing to help you guys. And then I asked them what the status of the property was out there, and they said, well, it is, this little 40-acre area is archaeological protection, and I says 40 acres is not enough. You have to expand it. And I said, I'll show you how big an area you need to expand this, because it needs to be protected.
So let me ask you this, though. It sounds like it was a fairly cordial meeting at this point, but are they taking an interest now in the Roswell incident and what's potentially out there, or are they taking more of an interest in people traipsing around this public land, digging up the hillside, so to speak, and metal detecting and ruining the wildlife and environment? I mean, which part of that is true?
All along, John, the young archaeologist several times during the meeting kept saying, we need to make arrangements, and you really do need to bring those artifacts in so I can see them and make a determination as to whether they are a cultural resource. She kept saying that over and over and over again. In the meantime, her managers are asking me questions, and it was really funny because they were asking me questions about, what do you know about the plains of San Augustine? What do you know about the Socorro? They were actually curious about the other locations.
Which are all UFO crash sites for those that
They're all
don't know.
UFO crash sites. They were asking me about all the other crash sites, and they were doing it from the standpoint of curiosity as opposed, unless it was just a game they were playing, because I'd been out to the plains of San Augustine and everything. So they asked me a lot of questions. That was what that other 45 minutes was. Basically, it was a cordial meeting, talk about ufology is what it was.
Wow.
And a lot of it was kind of laughing and joking around a little bit. But in reference to what you just mentioned to me,
mm-hmm.
Yes, they have a keen interest. They do want to look at the artifacts, or at least the young archaeologist wants to see them really bad. And by the way, she isn't going to see them because they are not anywhere to be found, and
mm-hmm.
she will never get her hands on them.
Mm-hmm.
They're very well protected. And in addition to that, the BLM does not want the area turned into a circus.
Yeah, and that's understandable. That's fair.
Yeah. They don't want to see. They got really upset over the idea of a commercial operation going on out there, and they said, "Frank, we're not going to allow that commercial operation to go directly to the crash site. They're going to go to the monument that was put out there in 2002 by the Sci-Fi Channel, but that monument is not the crash site. It's actually a pretty good distance away. So they want to protect it." And they want to treat it as if it is a real, live, honest-to-God cultural, scientific resource.
Wow.
And I agreed to that. I said, yeah, you can't have a zillion people, and it's been kept a secret for a long time where the crash site is. Although if you do research, you can figure out where it is.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want. And the young archaeologist said, I said, well, how come you don't have signs posted and you don't have this documented? And this is what she told me. She says, if I document this and release the stuff that I'm supposed to release out to the public, this is what she said, if we put up signs, she says, there'll be 1,000 pot diggers out there digging the whole place up because they'll have the exact location. And I'm going, you're right.
Yeah.
So you know what? The BLM really does try to hide the location. They really do. And from what they told me, the reason why they're doing that is because they don't want people out there digging up the place looking for metallic artifacts like I have done for the last 8 years. Although,
but you've got a professional background and you're respectful to the environment. There's a huge difference. So I mean, I can't believe I'm saying this. I somewhat agree with the government there on trying to preserve it, but I'm fascinated by the interest that they had on quizzing you about some of the other crash sites, even if it was just curiosity. But that's fascinating.
They were asking me, like I said, they asked me a lot about the plains of San Augustine, and they asked me about the Socorro site. They didn't ask me about Aztec, but they did ask me about the things that are within New Mexico. And it was, like I said, it was an interesting meeting. And my closing argument for this, not really an argument that I had during this thing, I says, I told him, I says, I look at this three ways. I says, the scientific research that I'm doing is going to take several pathways. And I says, one path is that this is nothing, that it is in fact nothing but trash that's laying out there in the desert, although I have some proof that may indicate that it's not trash. I says, if it does go the trash route, then I says, you're going to be embarrassed for protecting a bear party site.
Mm-hmm.
And they started laughing, and I says, if my research that I'm showing proves to be extraterrestrial, which I'm hoping that it does, I said, Chavez County, New Mexico, Roswell is going to end up being filthy rich from all the tourist traffic.
Mm-hmm.
The U.S. government will have to turn the site into a national park. And I said it will be history in the making. And the young archaeologist basically sat back and she says, please give it to the National Park Service, please.
Mm-hmm.
That's all she said. She said that about 3 times, and they were laughing. So during the whole time, apparently she's under a lot of stress. Somebody's pulling her strings about protecting this, but not giving out the location.
Wow. So before I lose you here, so obviously the meeting thankfully went well. You didn't bring the samples, so all the samples are safe. Sounds like you've got some more tests on the horizon. So as we close the interview here, can you kind of give us an idea of what's next for you?
Yes. Part of this, I'll just mention that a courier came in from a particular organization and picked this material up, and it's gone. So it was and it's people that I know. So the material, and not only that, there's going to be lots of testing done on this now that it's sort of like in the mainstream media area. People are kind of talking about it out there a little bit. And that they're going to, and this is by my request, it's going to be filmed, all of the testing. There's going to be no mistakes made on this, and come good or bad, good science, or if it comes out to be extraterrestrial, I'll be delighted. If it comes out to be something else, I'll still be delighted because it's just science, and that's what I'm all about. I'm not, because I don't write any books. Mm-hmm. Like I said, don't write any books out there. I'm the guy behind the scenes. So it's going to be, I'm going to be present during the analytical work. It's going to be filmed, and there's going to be a documentary out there in reference to this, and it's coming soon. And I don't know whether it's going to be on A&E or History or Discovery or Smithsonian or whatever. All of that stuff is in the works, and it's all going to be documented, and we'll get to see this whole story, because there's a little more behind this than what I've just mentioned to you. There was a really nice Smithsonian. It was called UFOs Declassified, and it's called UFO Crashes, or UFO Crash Sites. Is what it's called. So UFOs Declassified, UFO Crash Sites. They had a really, really good documentary about the work that I've done. They came out with a result that showed that it was terrestrial, but they didn't tell the rest of the story. The rest of the story behind this is that the chemistry of the aluminum can't be made on Earth. They never told people that.
Interesting.
And that is a guarantee, and I've got that data here, and that is the foundation for basically the documentary that's going to be coming out, was the research that was done, and the Smithsonian never told anybody what that is. So anybody that goes out and watches that, UFOs Declassified, UFO Crash Sites, when it gets to the end and they say, and Frank Kimbler continues to look for bits of metal in the desert, it's not of extraterrestrial origin, I got news for you. If you see the behind-the-scenes data that I have, which is a copy from the lab, it has a chemistry that we can't make. It is literally impossible to make it. So it's either an analytical error at the lab, and I spoke to the scientist, and he said no, that it was not an analytical error, or this stuff is not from Earth, regardless of what the isotopes say.
Well, I'm fascinated by it. I really am interested to hear the results and hear what happens next. The last quick question that I have for you, and then I'll let you go, because I know we've kind of gone a little bit over the allotted time, so I appreciate you and your time today speaking with us. Just recently, since all this, I'm a big advocate for really what the truth is, and it makes me cringe sometimes when people wind up in blog articles and so on and so forth. And this story was posted online that is connected connecting your samples to potentially the Pentagon secret UFO study. I don't know if you're familiar with this or if you know all about it. I'm not really sure. I didn't ask you this off the air, so I'm sorry to ask it on. But I just was curious if this is more of a rumor that people are trying to connect your samples to the Advanced Aviation Threat ID program ran by the Pentagon. Can you talk about that at all, or is that a rumor?
No, there's no truth to that. I have no connection, none whatsoever. Basically, I don't like secrets. I don't like things being hidden away. The public, if there are extraterrestrial metals out there, the research should be done. People should be aware of that. That's out there. I think I know who put that, blog out there.
Yeah, I'm not trying to put the spotlight and accuse them of anything.
It's okay. But there's a couple of those, and it's not. Most of these people I know, and sometimes there's a little. I would have to say to make their blogs take off or whatever, they get a little sensationalism going on it.
And it's a shame.
It is, and. Actually, I'll have to say that if it wasn't for some of the sensationalism that goes on with some of the blogs and stuff like that, the AH-1, the Anthill one, probably would have not been analyzed because it was that work that in some documentaries and stuff that were done. So for that, I'm thankful. But there's no connection between myself and the government, none whatsoever. On this, and I'm trying to think of the way to word this. I don't know what they did or what. I mean, I've seen some of those things out there. I haven't been following it all because I've been trying to keep track of my sanity.
And
the BLM thing. I think I'm still suffering jet lag from that one.
I think what the connection was, and again, I appreciate you taking the question because I know it's a little off the wall, but it was just a rumor, and I wanted to either put it to bed or at least confirm it. And I think what they were trying to say is that you would turn samples over to Robert Bigelow and Bass, and potentially Hal Puthoff and Earth Tech International, I believe is the scientific organization there. And that in turn, they turned it around and it got involved into the ATIP program.
You know what? I had thought about that. I thought about that sample being taken from out of the FedEx package and ended up with Bigelow. I know the Bigelow organization.
So you didn't give them a sample? Because it was
no.
Well, that's another rumor. I don't mean to laugh. It's so frustrating, and that's why I wanted to go straight to you when I first met you a couple weeks ago because. You don't know what to believe anymore. So it seems like, these articles that actually do get a little bit of play are too sensationalized.
Where did that? I got to find that.
I'll send it to you. And the only reason, just for those listening, I'm not out to make anybody look bad with blogs and stuff like that. But here's my bigger point to everybody. And then, Frank, I'll let you go. We'll close up. We'll figure out what your websites are and how people can get in contact with you. But the reason I bring this up is that bloggers, which are fine, there's some great ones out there, friends of mine and so on, but you got to be so careful with what you read. And this is a prime example, is that they take the story from Frank, who has an amazing story to tell that is factual, documented, and scientific, and that's what we have to focus on. They take a little piece of that, sensationalize it, and make it into a much bigger story. And I get so frustrated with the field for that. And I'm glad, you know what, at this point, I am glad I brought it up. And I'm not trying to say, hey, look at this blog. They're out there with a disinformation campaign. That's why I'm not mentioning who or where this was published. But it has been kind of picked up on a couple blogs now that people hear it. I call it copy and paste journalism. And it's not just bloggers that do that. It's the media as a whole. So that being said, if you guys take away anything from this, know Frank is scientific based. He can back up what he's claiming to you right now. And if you read some third-hand information that's not quoting, Frank here, be skeptical about it. Because as I think we've determined here, this is getting out of hand because the truth is cool enough. So that being said, Frank, I really do appreciate you speaking to not only that point, but everything.
I do like that comment that was it Mulder made from the X-Files.
Mm-hmm.
The truth is out there, or whatever it is. So.
Yeah, or trust no one. That's the other one that I like.
Trust no one. I've already run across that. You can't really trust anybody except maybe your family. And that's and your dog. You can always trust your dog.
Yeah, sometimes I question the family, but the dog, you're absolutely spot on with that one. So, Frank, the last thing, please tell everybody, how can they find your information, your website? How can they get in contact with you?
Well, actually, I don't have much of a website out there. Okay. And I don't mind giving out my email address. People can email. You can email me at fkimbler@gmail.com. I don't mind. I will do my best to answer everything. So it's fkimbler@gmail.com. If you happen to be in Roswell during the UFO Festival, I'm giving talks on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Friday, it's from like 4 to 5, I think, and then there's another one, and there's another one on Saturday from about the same time, and then on Sunday it's from like 1 to 2 or something like that. So come by and listen to me if you're in Roswell. I'll give you all. You'll get to know all about the artifacts, like in minute detail, all the science and everything. So.
That's awesome. And do you have the artifacts with you in Roswell, or are you just talking about it?
Are you kidding? No. Let's put it this way. There's some artifacts on display at the UFO Museum, but I will. I'm not going to lie to anybody. They are replicas. They look exactly like the material that I found, but they are not the real thing.
Well, after everything you've experienced, I really don't blame you for that. So, Frank, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. You're welcome back anytime. Let us know what happens with those future test results and future findings, too. Whatever you find, definitely give me a call.
I'll stay in touch, that's for sure. I just, like I said, I want to get an answer to the Roswell story here. I want some good physical, and it's going to take good science to do it, and that's what I do.
Well, I appreciate you, putting your expertise out there to pursue this. So thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. You too. Although that concludes my interview with Frank Kimbler, don't go away. Find out what new document just got added to the Black Vault that took me nearly 5 years and a heck of a lot of frustration to get a hold of in this episode's TBV Unredacted. In this episode's TBV Unredacted segment, I want to take an opportunity to introduce you to something that you'll probably hear quite a bit about in the coming episodes of the Black Vault Radio, especially the TBV Unredacted segments. Now, the Freedom of Information Act gives you a lot of power. It gets kind of a bad rap because people just assume it doesn't work or the government's going to black out everything, and that isn't true. The whole point of this segment is to really highlight those triumphs, those trophies that you can get when you take the time to file a FOIA request and take the time to research. It's not just requesting documents and pages here and there, but rather if you learn the ins and outs of these federal agencies and you learn how the military works and the government works on all levels, you can really request some amazing things from these agencies. Now, the one I want to focus and introduce you to in this segment is something called Intellipedia. Now, Intellipedia is probably not something that you've heard much about, maybe even heard at all. What you probably have heard of is something called Wikipedia. Now, Wikipedia has nothing to do with the government, but you've probably stumbled on it because it's the online encyclopedia. You can get information on, like, literally everything that you would want to research. It's kind of controversial on sometimes the slant to a certain way when it explains certain topics, but for the most part, it's a fairly powerful resource and one that tries to remain unbiased and factual. Now, inside the government, inside the intelligence community, there is something called Intellipedia. Now, this is not a public resource, but rather this is an internal resource that different federal agencies can use inside the intelligence community and use it as a reference tool. Now, for many years, it was actually not known how big this system was. And under the Freedom of Information Act, I really started hammering the National Security Agency with requests for Intellipedia entries, because under the FOIA, you can actually request certain pages on, pick a topic, fill in the blank. You can request whatever. So I've gone after literally hundreds and hundreds of pages from the Intellipedia system. Now, a couple quick notes about the system that are not very widely known. It actually isn't a system, but rather 3 systems. There's a top secret Intellipedia, a secret Intellipedia, and a for official use only. So you've got 3 different levels that you can research, 3 different ways to request information. Now, my FOIA request to the NSA, now very quickly, why to the NSA? Well, the NSA is considered the one that's in charge of Intellipedia. They're the ones that run it and house it and pretty much maintain it, or at least the core infrastructure of it. Once your FOIA request goes to the NSA, and I'll use the CIA program MK Ultra, or their program on mind control as the example. The NSA then, although they are in charge of the Intellipedia system, the information within that specific entry will then be forwarded over to the CIA for processing. They'll process the request and release the information to you. So it kind of gets a little bit complicated. You have to start with the NSA, and then a lot of times they will, depending upon the topic of what you're requesting, funnel it out to different agencies and so on and so forth. So I've got hundreds of these pages. It's in the show notes for the Black Vault Radio, and if you don't know how to find that, just go to theblackvault.com/show notes. That will load every episode. This is episode number 2. Just find that, and it'll link over to the Intellipedia pages that I've been able to get declassified. Now, that being said, I went after the entry on Area 51. Now, there's obvious reasons why I went after it, but I wanted to see exactly what the Intellipedia system had on Area 51. The great thing about these entries, as you take a moment to look through some of the ones that I've been able to get declassified, just like Wikipedia, not only do they have the entry and some information, sometimes it's a page, sometimes it's 30 pages, but they also have a references section. Now, this is one of the main reasons why I request these entries, because although the entries are pretty interesting, haven't really found really boring ones yet, the references section really gives you what I'll call FOIA fodder. And the FOIA fodder is literally leads to go after reports, regulations, report numbers, contract numbers, project names, you name it. The references section and even the entry itself really holds this FOIA fodder to turn that one specific FOIA request for that Intellipedia entry into 15 others. And yes, that happens with me quite frequently, where you get these leads and it turns into 15 others. Now, back to the Area 51 entry. Now, this I filed back in November of 2013, if you can believe it. That's how long ago it was. And it actually, the first response that I received was from the Department of the Army. And specifically, this came from the U.S. Army Installation Management Command, or INSCOM is what they're called. And so, for whatever reason, the entry was forwarded to their office for declassification. It consisted of a single page on Area 51, but it wasn't what you expect. Now, we all know that Area 51 is that top secret military installation that's about north of Las Vegas, and that's what I expected. Let me read to you the very short entry for Area 51 that I got declassified in 2016. Quote, Area 51 is a dining facility at Fort Bliss, Texas. It is utilized mainly by 2nd Brigade, 1st Armored Division. Breakfast costs $2.45. Lunch is $4.50. That is the brunt of the entry on Area 51. Yes, it is a dining facility in Fort Bliss. I had no idea, but this is legitimate. This was a real entry. It was classified secret. I got it declassified, and the Army sent it to me in November of 2016. This is where it gets weird. So I knew there had to be more. I mean, there had to be references to the Area 51 that we know and love. So I followed up and tried to see, like, is this really it? Is this the only entry for Area 51? I got varying answers, But this then would continue on for years. And this is the crazy thing about this, and why I'm profiling the Area 51 Intellipedia entry this this episode, because it took years to actually get. In fact, it wasn't until just the last couple of weeks when finally I received what I actually was looking for, which was the Area 51 that we know and love, the military installation. Here's the weird thing, though. In nearly 5 years, this is the map that my FOIA request traveled as it bounced around from agency to agency over almost 5 years. Started with the National Security Agency in 2013. It was forwarded to the Army. Then it went to Edwards Air Force Base, where I fought for a long time. Then they claimed they lost it. Then they had to refile at Edwards Air Force Base, and I got a brand new case number. After months of waiting there, it went to the United States Air Force headquarters because Edwards says, hey, wait, we're not the right place for this. It goes to United States Air Force headquarters. Where do you think it goes next? Right back to Edwards Air Force Base. Edwards Air Force Base sat on it for a while. Now I'm getting really frustrated because we are years into me waiting for this thing. So I write a huge letter, and I CC the NSA, the Army, Edwards Air Force Base, the HQ of the United States Air Force, everybody that had handled this request, and wrote them a letter saying, this is ridiculous. This is almost 5 years that I have waited for this thing. I got a response from Edwards Air Force Base. You know what they did? They forwarded it. They forwarded it back to the NSA. That same agency that I filed the original request for in November of 2013, in June of 2018, it wound up right back where it started. I was furious at this point. I laugh about it now, but I was furious. Wrote another letter, CC'd every agency there, including what's called OGIS. And OGIS is a part of the National Archives that helps mediate these types of disputes, because clearly this was not something that should have happened under the Freedom of Information Act. You shouldn't wait 5 years for something like this, and you shouldn't watch your request bounce around. So I finally got the document from the National Security Agency, and they released it to me. And was there a lot of interesting stuff in it? Not really. I'll actually read it to you because it's not too long. It's not a dining facility, thank goodness. I didn't get that page again. Or actually, I take that back. They did send me that as well. But at least they gave me the real page that I was looking for. This specific one was declassified from the top secret level. So the secret level had the one on the dining facility. That was in Intellipedia's secret version. The top secret version had the same entry title of Area 51, and it reads, Area 51 is a military base and a remote detachment of Edwards Air Force Base. It is located in the southern portion of Nevada in the western United States, 83 miles north-northwest of Las Vegas. Situated at its center, on the southern shore of Groom Lake, is a large military airfield. The base's primary purpose is to support development and testing of experimental aircraft and weapon systems. Had a couple references that I talked about. One was a reference to an article on dreamlandresort.com by Peter Merlin, and another one that references, I believe, Ben Rich's book, page 57. And he says in his book, Rich describes Groom in 1977 as being, quote, a sprawling facility bigger than some municipal airports, a test range for sensitive aviation projects. So not anything huge revelation-wise from this, but I wanted to profile this document because it took 5 years to get, nearly 5 years to get, and the amount of bouncing around this FOIA request did. There's obviously something about Area 51 that they do not want us to know about, and it's something that is definitely on the top of the list when it comes to the most problematic documents that I've ever had to track down. Before I close this segment, one last note. I want to expand on the Area 51 thing just for a moment, because a few years ago there were a lot of headlines about the government finally acknowledging Area 51 is a military base. And the mainstream media, and I mean quite a few big names in the mainstream media, said that that was the first time that Area 51 had ever been acknowledged by the United States military or the United States government. Sounds like pretty cool news. However, I have had documents on the Black Vault that were declassified from the Department of Energy and the CIA since 2001. Nearly a decade and a half, roughly, from this media frenzy over Area 51 and it's being officially acknowledged and all that stuff. These documents I had online in 2001. Again, not trying to pat myself on the back, but the reason I bring this up is the lack of research done when reporting on these topics. And that is the motivation, or at least one of the big parts of my motivation, to do the Black Vault Radio and specifically this segment. Sadly, the government does lie. There's no way around that. For years, I tried never to say that. But I do have another saying, which is a show in itself. But what I say is, the documents don't lie. And I really mean that. The documents do not lie. The intent behind them might be a lie, but you cannot change these physical pieces of paper, these documents, and that's why I love them so incredibly much. Because when that stuff was released to me in 2001, you can never change it. It could have been based on a lie, but my point is that the document itself proves an amazing story. And the United States government had admitted to Area 51 to me back in 2001. And I've had those documents on. And sadly, a lot of these investigative journalists, when they report on things, they just don't look at history. They just try and rewrite it. I don't want to do that here. I want to give you guys the truth. Enjoy that document. It's only a page. I read the majority of it to you, but definitely check out that Intellipedia system because I think you'll really, really find some of those entries interesting. Just to give you some ideas, I have the entry for Scientology, the Pentagon Papers, MK Ultra, Nikola Tesla, the Loch Ness Monster, the Iran-Contra affair. You name it, I'm going after it. And Intellipedia, shockingly, usually has something on it. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Black Vault Radio. I am your host, John Greenewald Jr. Stay tuned, more episodes to come, and make sure you subscribe on iTunes, on Stitcher, on YouTube, whatever your choice is. Track me down, subscribe, because there is a heck of a lot more coming your way. Thanks for listening.